One day he asked me the cost of the silk stockings he wore. I replied, for His Majesty, they cost 18 francs. And why more for me than for others? I won't have that. Must I be robbed? No, sire. I like to think that the quality coupled with the fact that it is for your Majesty is what raises the price. That's what I don't want, unless you make up the difference out of your own pocket, he said to me, pinching my ear hard. This reminds me that once at a hunting party in Bagatelle, when the emperor was lunching with all the guests, he asked his sister, the Queen of Naples, who was wearing on her lovely head a charming pink hat shaped like a helmet with white feathers, how much that finery cost her. She replied, 300 francs. You're being robbed, madame. With such a sum, I would equip 10 of the Empress's dragoons more solidly than you are. In Elba, the emperor was 44 years old. In his youth, he had been quite slender, his complexion sallow, his face long, his eyes deep set. Such was the fine head we knew when he was consul, supported by a superb frame. The plumpness he had since acquired produced his fine imperial head, the face that had filled out, the whiter skin, and that countenance full of expression and genius that appeared taken from antiquity. I recall that Princess Pauline's hairdresser, who had come one day to cut his hair, having finished his job, took 3 steps back from the emperor like an artist in front of his masterpiece, and kneeling said in Italian, His Majesty has an admirable Roman head. It was true, but the emperor had a good laugh from the exclamation and attitude of Rodamonte. That was the hairdresser's name. Nothing, indeed, of the portraits I have seen of the emperor matched the fine head I had before my eyes, except for David's portrait. And the etching has something heavy about it that the emperor did not have. Chaude's bust, in my opinion, must serve as model. The emperor was of average height, broad-chested, and had a fine figure. His hands were fine, and his feet well-formed. The skin of his body was pink, contrasting with his face, which had a Mediterranean tint to it. His head was large, covered with very fine chestnut hair, thin over the forehead, but sufficient to form a characteristic curl. He shaved so as to have no whiskers. A few people still believe the emperor used a lot of tobacco, and that, like Frederick the Great, he would stuff it into his vest pocket instead of his snuff box. Suffice to say, to counter such an assertion, that his vest pockets were fakes. The tobacco he used was coarse, and his handkerchiefs were rarely stained by it. It did happen that his snuff box would open in his pocket occasionally, and a rare accident was presented as a habit. Every morning at 7 a.m., Monsieur Ferraud de Beauregard, His Majesty's doctor, came when he got up. The emperor would talk about his health, which was generally very good, chat with him about medicine, and question him about his previous evening's activities. His Majesty held him in high esteem and liked him. During his stay at Elba, the emperor vomited twice, in a manner similar to the way he did shortly after our arrival in St. Helena, which worried us later. Were these the first symptoms of the illness that took him from us? I do not know. Dr. Ferraud was immediately summoned, and His Majesty talked at length about the causes of such vomiting and the means to prevent it. He said to him, Doctor, my father died of a problem with his pylorus. You must do all you can to save my son from this. This vomiting did not tire him. He would rinse out his mouth and return to the drawing room without any apparent alteration on his face. It is unfortunate that Dr. Ferraud could not take care of the emperor and follow him to our awful rock. Perhaps he might have saved His Majesty for us, as he was a member of the Chamber of Deputies during the 100 Days. The emperor made him consider his duty to pursue the mandate received from his supporters, as well as the thought of serving the best interests of the King of Rome there. The emperor had streaky scars on his thighs. He was in the habit of scratching them and was not distraught when they bled a little. He considered this good for his health and a useful light form of bloodletting. One day the emperor scratched him enough for blood to flow out. He pointed out to Dr. Ferraud, who was present, the abundance of the blood and told him the source of this itching, as well as the scar from a bayonet wound above the knee. He told him it was in Toulon when I commanded the famous battery of fearless men. A gunner fell by my side. I grabbed his swabs so that my gunfire would not slow down and caught this man's scabies. I was poorly treated. The virus penetrated inside, and I lost a lot of weight during my Italian campaigns. Even my chest was affected. I was urged to see a doctor. I saw Corvisor, and his manner suited me, and he said to me, "It's nothing. It's an ingrown humor that must be drawn back out." He applied 2 vesicatories to my chest, which felt less depressed. My cough disappeared. That's what made Corvisor, your teacher, rich. It is from that moment that I put on weight. These little scars open up from time to time, and it serves as a bloodletting. I always sense ahead of time when these attacks will occur. Though he did not have a high opinion of medicine, the emperor liked to discuss it with his doctor. One day, Dr. Ferrot came with several anatomical charts he was explaining to His Majesty. The emperor listened to him carefully and told him he had also wanted to study that branch of science, but had to give it up because of the repulsion and odor of cadavers, which he could not stand. Turning to talking about himself, he said to him, "For me to commit some excess that is contrary to my normal habits restores a proper balance in me. After a long rest, a day's hunting, or several hours' ride does me good. What leads to my rarely needing your ministrations is that I know my limit, and if I exceed it, my stomach will immediately surrender the excess." The emperor had the same attacks in St. Helena, but they disappeared during the last years of his life. The itching had no effect. He scratched, but nothing would flow. His sweating, formerly quite abundant, disappeared. Chapter 4. Everything on Elba had to be created. The emperor first attended to his lodgings in town and in the country, and to provide apartments for Madame Mère and Princess Pauline, who came to join him, never to leave again. Her affection for His Majesty attested to this. Foreigners were many on the island. It was up to the inhabitants to provide practical lodgings for them. A number of distinguished Englishmen who came there and had the honor of being presented to the emperor were struck by the clarity of his conversation. As soon as the guard had arrived, the grenadiers and the chasseurs not on duty were used to demolish furnaces near the house that had once served to heat cannon shot, as well as a large quantity of shacks that cluttered the periphery. They had to resort to explosives. These were bomb-proof buildings. A fixed-price arrangement was made with the soldiers. They had a very hard time and asked the emperor for a bonus, saying they would drink only water. The bonus was granted in a very short time. A fine terrace and a garden replaced those shacks. Thus isolated, the palace dominated on all sides. All kinds of workmen, distinguished foreigners, and a great number of Englishmen and French tradesmen traveling in Italy arrived on the island, and rentals became very expensive. A great deal of activity was noted everywhere. The palace could only be reached by a steep flight of stairs. His Majesty had a fine street laid out, winding through the town, allowing people to reach the palace by carriage. Roads were laid out. One from Portoferrajo to Marciana was already progressing well. That leading to Porto Longone was completed. Another heading for San Martino was being finished. The emperor had purchased there, from a man named Maganero and a few others, a very spacious piece of land covered by a good vineyard. He had a charming country house built there. During the time it was being built, San Martino became the destination of his outings, either on horseback with an ADC or by carriage, escorted by a picket of Polish lancers. 30 of these fine men, commanded by Major Belinsky, came from Parma with their horses to join their comrades of the guard. These activities were interrupted by the sad news of Empress Josephine's death on May 29, 1814. The emperor appeared deeply saddened. He locked himself up in his study and saw only the Grand Marshal a few moments during the day. Speaking about that princess, the emperor said she had the elegance of a Creole, combining with infinite grace and charm, a conviviality and evenness of temper that never failed. Everything she wore was elegant and set the fashion, and her night apparel was as elegant as her days. While recognizing that princess's taste for spending, adding that he had several times had to settle her debts, he paid her justice by saying that among the debts she contracted, there were some that helped make friends for her through little things given at the right moment with her habitual grace. Either in Elba or in St. Helena, the emperor always spoke of her with the same outpouring of feelings. He would say, Josephine exceeded all others by the grace of her manners when she gave. She loved the arts and protected them, and would do battle with Denon to have a few paintings to decorate her gallery. My instructions to Denon would put all in proper order. The first time the emperor saw her, he was charmed more by her wit and graciousness than by her beauty. She was appealing. Marriage followed soon after that first impression, which, far from waning, gained more strength every day, and after the divorce turned to affection full of esteem. A visit paid her by Emperor Alexander and the Prussian king was the cause of her death. She had been ill for some days and rose and dressed up a bit to receive the two sovereigns. A blocked fever, followed by a sore throat, led her to her grave. With her kind disposition, excellent heart, and true sensitivity, she would pity other people's misfortunes and cry with those who came to tell her their troubles, which, the emperor said, often made her the prey of manipulators good at exploiting such sensitivity. The emperor wanted to stop this tendency towards spending. He had threatened to put in jail a certain person he suspected of encouraging the empress on that path. This was Mademoiselle Despots, a dress or hat maker. Spotting her one day, he ordered that she be expelled from the palace and taken by 4 gendarmes to Vincennes. The order given to the Duke of Vigo, Savary, was carried out in force, and this woman was already walking at the end of the avenue to Saint-Cloud, very worried about what could have earned her such treatment, when Marshal de Roc, hearing that the emperor's joke had been taken seriously, ordered that Mademoiselle Despots be allowed to get into his carriage. She arrived in Paris sickened by the emperor's prank. At the palace, where the story was much repeated, the empress women called this action a bit too barbaric. Memories of the empress were connected with the finest moments of the emperor's political career. The Italian campaigns, the Montebello negotiations, Campo Formio, the consulate, the first years of the empire. With Josephine, his star rose. She had, during her second marriage, an extraordinary brilliance. She was then the evening star. Marie-Louise's purse amounted to 50,000 francs a month. 20,000 francs were for the poor. Her reserve fund was 20,000 francs. With less money than Josephine, she accomplished more, being better organized. Her alms were plentiful, but she did not know how to give, as Josephine did. The island of Elba, where the emperor was settling, was a place for calm and philosophical thought. How stable would it be? Was there not already something vague in his hopes, something uncertain in his future? He dared not admit it, and sought to distract himself. The work he had undertaken brought him back to something solid he wished to hold on to, and which each day escaped him. A few days of sorrow, the laborers, masons, and carpenters once more occupied his time. He could be found among them very early, sometimes wearing silk stockings and buckled shoes, listening to and laughing at their comments. In order to receive Princess Pauline, the emperor had a very fine apartment constructed. Above the ground floor he occupied, and a very large building close to the palace, fixed up as a ballroom and small theater. The best painters in Italy came to decorate them, as well as the theater in town. The emperor had to leave the palace for a short while. He went to live in the hermitage of the Madonna di Marciana. He took only a few people with him. Paoli, captain of the gendarmerie, and the ADC, Bernardi, accompanied him there. A few grenadiers and 3 Mamelukes camped nearby. Marciana Marina sits at the foot of the tallest mountain on the island, Mount Campana. That village is inhabited by fishermen. A long and steep hill leads to Marciana. The town is small. A climb just as long leads to the hermitage of the Madonna. There, under a chestnut grove, stood a well-built chapel suitably decorated inside. Next to it was a 1-story structure consisting of 4 interconnected rooms, which were made suitable for housing the emperor by painting the walls and washing the tile floor. 2 hermits had retired there, far removed from the world and its faults. Living off the alms they went to collect each day in the town and surrounding villages. They moved into the house cellar, which was dug into the rock. As the house nestled on a gentle slope, They were helpful and devoted, helped their neighbors, and set a good example by their virtues. They served this chapel, which at one point during the year attracted from the neighboring communities a pilgrimage of the inhabitants, who never failed to drop an offering into the alms box. A man whose name had spread across the universe and whose kindness and virtues were of a different nature had come to occupy their modest abode. The fickleness of fortune and political friendships, the passions of men and public opinion were for him subjects of meditation just as rich and fulfilling as those adopted by the two good hermits. Near the chapel, facing the main door, a building had been erected, semicircular in shape, of Doric design. Its entablature, held up at regular intervals by pilasters. Out of this flowed an abundant spring of clear and pure water, born of the mountainside that went gurgling along to vanish into the chestnut grove, maintaining its coolness. Lilies of the valley, heliotrope, and violets filled the shade and dampness of the forest with their aroma. It was a delightful sight. The calmness of the nights and the soft moonlight led to melancholy dreams, of which the emperor appreciated all the charm. Not far from the mountain, climbing further up toward the peak of Mount Campana, one encountered a totally bare rock, and the view from there dominated the Tuscany archipelago, the Corsican Sea, Pianosa, and Monte Cristo. These two islands appeared to be at the foot of Elba. From that point, the emperor could imagine the paternal roof in Ajaccio, and far beyond, that beautiful France whose destiny he had abdicated. The emperor liked that solitary rock. He went there, and one day felt like taking a nap there. Captain Mellini, who was with him, did a charming sketch of the scene. He soon abandoned his pencil and grabbed a hammer and chisel, carving into the rock the hour, the date, and the year when the prince had slept there. We owe to this engineering officer a few sketches of Elba made by him, among them the departure of the small Portofino fleet for the coast of France. The emperor spent his time in trips to the surrounding villages. Everywhere he relived unhappiness. I was often the minister of his charities to the poor, the pastors of Marciana and Poggio making the distributions. The emperor had been at the hermitage for a few weeks. Then on August 2nd, he was told of Madame's arrival in Portoferrajo. He immediately left the table and, to rejoin his dear ones more quickly, went down to the Marciana Marina and got into his boat. I went with him while the servants proceeded on land. The sea was rough, but he arrived in Portoferrajo just as Madame was landing. He kissed her several times, thus drying the tears flowing from his mother's eyes. So many things had happened since their separation. The emperor took Madame to her lodgings. A spacious house near the palace had been prepared for her. Madame was in good health and still showed great beauty. She was then 60. She had kept her figure and appeared 10 years less than her age. A woman of great character, she had endured with courage and resignation the loss of a husband she adored, whose portrait went with her everywhere. From that point on, she devoted herself entirely to her children. The emperor would say, "Madame is full of nobility and pride. She is worthy of all veneration. The care she took of us and our education sets a rare example of a family where so many clever and capable children are found." Madame was sharing her husband's perils while she was pregnant with the emperor. She bore 13 children. Widowed at 30, she was left with 5 boys and 3 girls. Joseph, the oldest, who was king of Naples in Spain, Louis, king of Holland, Jerome, king of Westphalia, Pauline, Princess Borghese, Caroline, queen of Naples, Elisa, Grand Duchess of Tuscany, and Prince Lucian, whose opinions kept him apart from the emperor, and who during the 100 days came back to him. The emperor often told how his mother, pregnant with him, had wanted to go to the Mass on April 15th, Assumption Day. She had come home in haste and, unable to reach her room, gave birth to him on a rug showing great men of legend. I had occasion to see at Madame's house in Portoferrajo a full portrait of the emperor's father, Charles Bonaparte. He was a very handsome man. The emperor spoke of him as a superior man. He died of stomach cancer in Montpellier. Madame brought with her a chamberlain, Monsieur Helena, 2 ladies' companions, and her household staff. Among her servants was quite an old woman who walked bent over and who had brought up all of Madame's children. Her name was Savaria. Madame trusted her and she lorded it over the household. She was prone to much miserliness, which was then attributed to Madame. The latter was quite well ordered, but not parsimonious, as people liked to say. Madame Savaria came one day and asked to see the emperor, who was then in his bedroom. I informed him this, and he said at once, "Have Savaria come in." The emperor said to her in Italian, laughing, "Well, Savaria, are you still as miserly as I've always known you to be?" She replied in the same language, "Sire, it is not miserliness, it is prudence." She was very pleased with the kind reception given her by the emperor, and the promise of a job for one of her grandchildren who had just arrived in Elba. The Honorable Father Bonavita became Madame Mare's chaplain. The emperor returned home happy after a few hours spent with his mother. He went to bed, but was sick during the night. In Marciana, he had asked one of the Mamelukes of his guard to prepare a Turkish-style pilaf. That's a dish. The garlic present in part of the food he was offered whetted his appetite, but during the night he had trouble digesting. A few cups of tea helped. Laughing the next day about the dinner prepared by the Mameluke, he confessed having never eaten as much or with such good appetite. On August 15th, the emperor's birthday was celebrated on the island. The civilian, military, and church officials came to pay their respects to His Majesty. A large dinner was given on this occasion, attended by Madame Countess Bertrand, her husband, and General Drouot, General Cambron, Colonel Mallet, Grand Vicar Arrighi, and Monsieur Senot, mayor of the city, the president of the court, and Monsieur Pont de la Hero. After dinner, the emperor asked me for a little box containing some jewels he had sent from Genoa. Each guest shared in his generosity. General Drouot received a pin shaped like an eagle. The guard was not to be outdone by the town and wanted to give a party also. When evening came, the artillerymen set off some very fine fireworks they had prepared themselves. That night there was a public ball. Having watched its beginnings, His Majesty went home, changed from his uniform into civilian garb, donned a round hat, and went off with Count Bertrand to mingle with the crowd. He had ample proof of the love of the good Albans felt for him. Exuberant and open gaiety lasted well into the night. That same day the emperor had attended a meal with his guard, who were never happier than when he was in their midst. As soon as he appeared, cries could be heard of "Vive l'Empereur" coming from the heart, and a deputation of non-commissioned officers came to offer him a glass of wine, with which he toasted their health. It was for all these old warriors a moment of enthusiasm, approaching delirium. The emperor went home only at midnight, pleased with his day. Since Napoleon's arrival, Porto-Ferrajo was no longer recognizable, and its peaceful residents were very thankful for the work being done everywhere. Streets heretofore impassable were opened up for carriage traffic, now able to reach the palace and also go to Ponticelle. A theater, christened De Fortunati, was finished. Its decoration was completed. All that was needed was the arrival of the Italian artists, who, for a slight stipend, were to move in. Rumors even circulated that Madame Grassini and Crescentini, along with the famous composer Payer, were due to arrive for its inauguration. The emperor had always been very kind to the artists he protected. Those just mentioned had been the object of his munificence. The first artist could not forget that at the same time of his coronation in Milan, he had attracted his attention. At that time, His Majesty had summoned her, and after the first moments of their meeting, she reminded him that she had made her debut at the time of his first exploits in Italy. "I was then," she said, "at the peak of my beauty and talent. I appealed to all eyes. I set all hearts on fire. You alone remained aloof, and yet you alone attracted my interest. When I was worth something, when all Italy was at my feet, I scorned all that for one glance from you. In vain, and it is now that I am no longer worthy of you that you finally look at me." The emperor liked to recall that episode in his life, and the woman whose speech had charmed him as much as her person. In addition to gifts, Crescentini had received the Iron Cross decoration. This decoration was foreign, and so was the man. People highly disapproved of such a deed, but all the clamor was drowned out by a remark that becomes successful when uttered by an attractive woman like Madame Grassini. People were talking indignantly in front of her in a salon where she was about the awarded decoration when she rose majestically and said, "And his wound, sir, does it count for naught?" There was such a brouhaha that she was embarrassed by her success. That was the end of it. Monsieur Payer, music master to the Empress Marie-Louise, had also been showered with kindness by the emperor. These three people felt a debt of gratitude toward him, and during the 100 days, they told me that had the emperor remained in Elba, they would certainly have come there to entertain him. Thelma and Mademoiselle Georges also proposed to do so. That autumn, a few garrison officers, General Lebel, who had just arrived with his charming daughter who was honored by Napoleon, and a few local ladies, put on a performance of the Caliph of Baghdad. This was well done and quite successful, given in a small theater erected in a large hall the emperor had built near the palace in order to give balls there during the winter. The emperor expressed his satisfaction and his desire to hear them again.